One of the things that Vietnam really, really taught me was that everything ends. No matter what it is, it's going to end eventually. No matter how bad it is, how good it is, how intense it is, whatever it is, it's going to end. There's a beginning and an end. When I grew up, the values they were pretty much apple pie, 4th of July. You do what you say you're going to do. You're held accountable. You can go ahead and do the crime, but if you do the crime, you got to do the time. And it was a very innocent time. Chula Vista was kind of like Leave It to Beaver. And back in the day, we moved over there in 1950 from San Francisco, which is where I was born. I could ride my bike downtown alone. It was that kind of town. Commuter town, everyone worked in San Diego. Small town, a lot of Navy. We had a sense of patriotism, in our country, but we really didn't hear much about Vietnam. 65, you heard rumbles of Vietnam, but nothing major. I actually enlisted in my senior year, and probably was wise enough, even at that age, to understand that the Army would probably be a good, military would probably be a good place for me. So I joined the Army in my senior year. I went in after my last summer. It was good for me to do that. In our basic training, I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana. 3 of us that were promoted out of basic by being exemplary troopers. I went from there to medics training at Fort Sam Houston. 12 or 14 weeks, and then we were trained to be a combat medic. Put that in perspective, the medics in the service today, they have like a year and a half of training. So I was actually sent from Fort Sam Houston to Fort MacArthur, California. I was in the outpatient clinic there, and I could have stayed there probably my entire military if I wanted, but I was a medic, and I could have found myself getting in lots of trouble. So I volunteered for Vietnam, didn't have to go, and I volunteered to go. I was sent over to Vietnam in February of 1967. I was assigned to the flight surgeon's office there, which meant I would have just stayed in Quy Nhon the whole time, and essentially had a 8-to-5 job, and that lasted about 2 weeks. Then some pilots from Dust-Off, which is a medevac, came in for their flight physicals. I said, that's pretty cool. I said, could I go fly with you guys? I said, sure, come on ahead. So I went over there and did some training, and about a week after that, transferred into Dust-Off voluntarily. So we would actually go out to a forward camp. Let's say it was 101st Airborne or the 1st Division or whatever division it was. They'd be out in an area, so they'd set up a forward camp. So we'd go out and we'd set up essentially support the aid station there. The camps were pretty much makeshift. They weren't permanent. You'd come in and they could set up a camp in a day. And it was essentially sandbags, hex tent, and you have your different areas. You have your mess tent, you'd have your troop tents. We were always by the medical. And as Dust-Off, we never had to set up our own tents. We never did sandbags. Medevac, we were essentially the air ambulance. So we did a lot of things. We had what they called DCS, which were just normal missions, where you transport patients from one hospital or aid station to another. Or we transported civilians, Vietnamese. And then we had the combat missions where you were supporting combat units, and we went in and picked up guys that were hit in the field, and they either were sick or they were wounded. When we're in the middle of stuff, if we're going in, let's say, to hot LZ, and a hot LZ means they were drawing fire, and we would be going in, and the minute that helicopter going in with the red crosses, where the fire is going to be going to us. Flying in was always worse than the rest of it because you were going in and they'd be in radio contact with the ground and they'd pop smoke. And of course, the minute they pop smoke, Charlie, the Vietnamese, they're popping smoke all over the place trying to get you to come in there. So we'd have to make sure we had the right puff of smoke to go after. Our normal process is we'd come in, we'd be up high, come in fast, what they call combat dive, come in about anywhere from 10 to 12 feet, 10, 8, 6 feet. I'd be bailing out, grabbing the guys, picking them up, just slapping them in the ship and getting the hell out. And we were never on the ground more than a minute or two, ever. It wasn't litters, it wasn't pretty, it was pick them up, slap them down, dead or alive, didn't matter, get them out. And the grunts on the ground they'd be pretty intense because they would run on either sides of us. Everyone out there was a hero. Everyone was doing stuff that you would never imagine anyone could do, should do, could even think to do, and they just did it. And it wasn't a thought, I'm going to get up and run, and protect this medic, or I'm going to jump out and grab this guy and get him out of that rice paddy and get him on the ship so maybe he can live. You just, hey, we got some people down, let's get out of there. There's people that talk about time slows down. Probably sped up for me more than slowed down. And there was a lot of reaction rather than action. Well, a lot of times I'd be shot at, I didn't even know it until it was already done. My reaction was I wanted to shoot back. It was more of an anger of, how dare that son of a bitch shoot at me? One of the things that Vietnam did, I can only assume it's the same for all warriors, we didn't talk about it. Most of the time, quite frankly, I think we just were in total denial. Now, there'd be times after a particularly adrenaline-charged mission, I'd shake for an hour, whether it was the adrenaline or whatever it was. I mean, I couldn't hold a cup of coffee. But if people went down, goodbye, and there was no release, there was no grief counselors, you just shut up and sucked it up. When I left for Vietnam, it was early 1967. And 67, 68 were really pivotal years as far as how our culture changed. And there really weren't hippies when I left. They were just kind of coming in. The war movement was just kind of picking up. When I came back, and there was these kids at the time, which had dressed like in Civil War suits and all this stuff, and they came up to me and said, "You just back from Vietnam?" I said, "Well, yeah." And they said, "Well, you're a baby killer." It was just reacting. What do you mean I'm a baby killer? I gave mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to a VC to keep the sucker alive, because that's what we did. So to be called baby killers it was unjust, but it was mostly ignorant. And the people who were doing it, for the most part, had no idea what they were talking about. What I saw was we'd go into villages and we would take the pregnant mom to the hospitals where her baby would live. We'd pick up the kids that were sick or maimed or hit with bombs or booby traps and try to do everything we could to save them. If we picked up an enemy combatant, none of them flew out of my ships. We gave them the best medical care we could. They were a human being. If you went into a Vietnamese village that had been ravaged by the NVA or by the Viet Cong or were in their control, they were so grateful for what help we gave them, the medical help, our protecting them. And I think seeing that side of life probably impacted a great deal of my appreciation for our life here. I can get pretty maudlin pretty quick when I think about some stuff from Vietnam. I talk about some stuff and it just choked. It's a reaction I'm not sure I understand to where, you get choked up or you just, wow, out of nowhere. So I'm sure there's a great deal still bottled up, and that's okay. Bottled up probably works. It's a way of coping. Our expectations are, you go to Vietnam, you do what you do, you come back here, and it's like you weren't there. Why did I go to Vietnam? A sense of duty. My country was there, and it was the evil communist. And there's, unfortunately, a lot of truth to the evil. Evil's done by all sides in war, and we know that. But the evil that I saw perpetrated in the Vietnamese people was particularly heinous. I felt at the time I was young enough and silly enough to think, well, we're right, they're wrong. I understand that there's a little bit of gray in there now. But at the time it was, we're there, it's my country, I'm going to go do my part. And probably even more importantly, it didn't matter if it was right or wrong, there were American soldiers on the ground and I was going to take care of them. Vietnam taught an awful lot about the finality of death. The fact that you got to do what you got to do. And that's a good thing. Vietnam, right or wrong, I don't know. Doesn't matter. And it really doesn't. What matters to me is there are people alive today or alive then because of me. That was the end game for me. Didn't matter. Right, wrong, or indifferent, people were still being hurt. People still needed good medic, the best we could give them. And we did. We used to have a saying, if you weren't there, ain't nothing to talk about. And if you were there, there's nothing to talk about. And there's just no way to share it. So I find as I get older, there's probably a lot of emotions that have never been expressed. And I don't know if it's healthy, unhealthy, doesn't really matter. Once again, everything ends. No matter how bad it is, it's going to end. And that was then, this is now, and now does not include then.